And I am just now hitting the record button. I apologize. For those of you guys just joining us, we are getting close to finishing chapter 5. We are now recording, so this will be uploaded. You can review it later. There's new assignments on the blackboard. You can get into the chapter 5, and you can see there's a practice test. You don't have to complete this, but these are questions that are going to help guide you. In the blackboard, there's a folder, midterm. They have practice tests. They're just for practice. They're not for points, but you should take them and you should practice those questions. They'll only help your grade in the class and on the real written exam. So we are now recording and we are now launching forward. I'm going to hit the button that lets us screen share. Do you guys see the PowerPoint? Is that what you're seeing now?
Yeah, I see the PowerPoint.
Okay, good job. Awesome. Thank you. Cool. So this is us finishing our PowerPoints for chapter 5. At the end of finishing chapter 5 material, we're going to be having a test. This test will be the chapter 5. It'll be conclusive, chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, midterm style. We'll continue working on material today. Next meeting, which will be Wednesday, that's going to be when we will have a quick review session, and then we'll be launching the chapter 1 through 5 midterm test. We left off here on this slide here, which was TRSA, Terminal Radar Service Area. Airspace. Airspace is just a huge topic. Alphabet soup, A, B, C, D, E. There's no F, but there is a G. All the different airspaces. We've covered that in a previous chapter. We're getting our brains warmed up, and here's a special airspace called TRSA. This special airspace is going to be marked with a gray line. So we see these gray circles surrounding this airport. A TRSA is very similar to the idea of basically a delta airspace that, yes, has radar capabilities. So inside the center of this TRSA, I can probably hit a button to make this even bigger for your screen. There you go. So inside this TRSA airspace, you'll have the delta, which is at the very center, and that's why you're seeing that dashed blue for the delta airspace. Remember, your delta airspace typically goes up 2,500 AGL. Having a lot of issues with AGLs and MSLs when I grade your homeworks. So this delta airspace would go up 2,500 AGL, which would actually be equivalent to about 3,200 MSL. That's why you see that 3-2 inside the blue box. Your delta airspace is typically 4 nautical miles radius wide. So that's all review for you. We're getting your brain warmed up about airspace. The new aspect is that it's a TRSA, which is very similar to the idea of a delta because it is a delta airspace, but we now have radar service capabilities. So that's what this chapter has been about radar technology. And so if you're inside this gray circle, then it's very similar to the services that a Charlie airspace can provide you. You know, they can give you vectors, they can give you a squawk code. The only difference is that this is not Charlie. Remember, Charlie is solid magenta circle. This is a gray circle, so this is TRSA, and your participation is voluntary. So legally, yes, you could fly your airplane through this outer ring. You could fly through this outer ring and not talk to anybody. If you did that, you'd be perfectly legal. However, you'd be missing out on voluntary participation in their radar services. What would the better pilot do? The better pilot would call up the air traffic controller, get a squawk code, and receive those services. What are the services? Flight following, getting traffic advisories. So that's what this gray circle of TRSA is all about, and this is where we left off. Their primary responsibility is separating the IFR to IFR planes. The next responsibility would be separating the IFR from the VFR planes. And then as workload permits, they can separate the VFR from the VFR traffics. All right, so there's our TRSA. I'm going to hit the button to keep moving forward. All right, we have vocabulary words, more alphabet soup, more acronyms for you. ATIS, Automatic Terminal Information system. Think of this as ATIS. So this is what you're going to find at a towered airport. So at an airport with an operating control tower, there's certain information that those air traffic controllers do not want to have to repeat every airplane that calls them up. So instead, they record typically once an hour an ATIS. They'll give it some sort of alpha, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. They'll give it some sort of letter, and that's how everybody understands that we've all listened to the same ATIS information. So at a larger airport, it's impractical for the controller to speak all this information to every pilot. Could be things such as taxiway closures, runway closures. Could be things such as what direction the wind is blowing from, what the active runway might be, if there's any sort of NOTAMs for the airport area, what the ceilings, the visibilities. It is weather information, yes, but it could also be extra information beyond weather. So when you're really trying to think about all these different types of AWOS, ASOS, ATIS, these are all different automatic generated informations around surrounding airports. If it's a towered airport, then it's more likely an ATIS, and that reports up to the hour. So pilots will say, I've got up to the hour weather. That would be the ATIS, and you would have the Alpha, Bravo, Charlie identifier for that particular hour. That is different than AWOS, AWOS, ASOS, ASOS, which pilots would call up to the minute weather. The AWOS and the ASOS are going to be typically, a computer voice recorded, and it's up to the minute what that weather station is seeing at that minute. There is no alphanumeric identifier on an AWOS or ASOS. On the other hand, our ATIS is going to be typically recorded by the air traffic controller voice on duty. Not always, but typically, yes. So this is ATIS. We just covered that Tersa. Remember that Tersa airspace, which had the gray ring surrounding it? So that's a Delta airspace. And that Delta airspace, when the tower is in operation, you would expect to receive an ATIS. And that would be one of your procedures before you call up the air traffic controller. So before you call up the air traffic controller, it is your job to listen to the ATIS information. Nobody's asking any questions. Nobody's raising their hand. Nobody's saying they're having any issues. We're continuing to move forward. Our next slide is about flight service station. Hooray for flight service station. So FSS. This whole chapter is kind of about radio procedures, communications, all these different services that we can receive as pilots, who all we can communicate using our radio technology. So here is the flight service station. Flight service station, they are privatized through Lockheed Martin. Historically, they would have been a government employee, but nowadays they are privatized through Lockheed Martin. And they provide pilots with extra services. What kind of services could the flight service station provide us? I'm glad you asked. We can get weather briefings, en route communications, VFR search and rescue. So there's a phone number, 1-800-WX-BRIEF. Remember, I before E, except after C. So you got to be able to spell brief correctly. That'll probably be one of your questions you might see. What's the correct phone number to get a hold of flight service station? 1-800-WX-BRIEF. You can call them up. And even for your local flights at the Eagle Creek Airport, you can call up 1-800-WX-BRIEF before your flight, and you can tell them that I'm a student pilot about to go on a local flight out of Eagle Creek Airport in 2 hours, and they can give you a weather briefing. When you're doing your big, long cross countries, you can call ahead to get a hold of flight service station, and they can give you a weather briefing about the whole route of flight for your cross-country flights. A full weather briefing is going to include all sorts of good information beyond weather, such as NOTAMs as well. They'll even tell you if VFR flight is not recommended. Adverse conditions, lots of good information. So weather briefing's a huge role that flight service station provides. You can get a hold of flight service station on the ground or in the air using your telephone or the radio. there is a standardized frequency that you should know. There's a standardized frequency you're supposed to commit to memory as a pilot, and that is 122.2. 122.2, that's a VHF frequency, is the standardized frequency to get a hold of Flight Service Station when you are airborne more than 5,000 feet. If we're less than 5,000 feet, you might struggle on that standardized frequency, and you might have to use a more local frequency to get a hold of Flight Service Station. And that's like we covered in the other slides. Remember the VOR boxes, the blue communication VOR boxes? The information inside those boxes was for the VOR ground-based station, whereas the frequencies outside of the box are for the local frequencies to get a hold of the Flight Service Station in that area when you're less than 5,000 feet. Great. So we can get updated weather while we're flying. Great reason to contact flight service. Another really important thing for you to realize about Flight Service Station is that they are all about flight plan. So you file flight plan, amend flight plan, close flight plan, all with Flight Service Station. So a lot of new pilots, they're confusing the roles of air traffic controller versus the role of Flight Service Station. So these different entities can work together, they can communicate with each other, and there are many times where you might ask an air traffic controller to change your flight plan, open your flight plan, close your flight plan. And if that controller workload permits, they could possibly do that for you. But really, it's that controller passing the information on to the flight service specialist. So if you're trying to really place it all straight in your brain, flight plans, filing, changing, amending, closing, opening, changing flight plans is a flight service station function, whereas air traffic control separates airplanes, and then they could provide some of those other services on a workload basis. And that's why this slide is telling us that flight service stations can do VFR search and rescue. So when you file that flight plan and you open that flight plan, you activate that flight plan, a timer starts. On that flight plan, you had to write down how long you're going to be in flight. So if you expire, you go over time, then all of a sudden it's going to set off an alarm. And if flight service station can't get a hold of you, if they can't get you to answer your phone on the phone number you provided on the flight plan form, if they can't get a hold of air traffic control because you're not currently talking to ATC, if you become overdue because you filed and opened and activated the flight plan, then that's going to launch the search and rescue process. The search and rescue process is actually completed through Civil Air Patrol, CAP. So you hear about that a lot. As a student pilot, they actually have organizations that you can get involved with. So you can become a Civil Air Patrol cadet, and you can actually participate. You can participate as a student with the Civil Air Patrol as well. They have local chapters, and they'll do practice search and rescue operations. And this all goes together with our ELT, emergency locator transmitter, and that's how they help find these downed aircraft when our ELT sets off the alarm on 12150, the emergency frequency. So our slide is telling us that filing a flight plan can allow Flight Service Station to keep track of your departure and arrival and be familiar with your route of flight. If you change your destination, or if you're more than 15 minutes late at your destination, you should contact the nearest flight service station to adjust your time. If you do not close your flight plan within 30 minutes of your estimated time of arrival, search and rescue procedures will start. And, I hear there's a fine for that as well. So if you just forget to close your flight plan and you don't answer your phone and ATC can't get a hold of you, then, you could be financially responsible for those search and rescue efforts when the Civil Air Patrol launches an airplane to go searching for your downed aircraft. Is it a legal requirement to file a flight plan? No. As a 91 general aviation Part 91 operator, it's not a legal requirement for you to file a flight plan. Our university requests that, yes, you do file flight plans. We as a university are definitely encouraging you to get flight following, which is a separate service provided by air traffic control. So we're really just trying to keep straight the differences of air traffic control, flight service station, and the different services that they provide. So search and rescue. They're telling us here that ARTCC, that'd be like your air traffic control centers and your flight service stations, they alert search and rescue if there's a cause to believe that an aircraft has crashed. For VFR flights without flight following, a filed flight plan is the only means for determining their route of flight. If a plane is crashed, the emergency locator transmitter will transmit the signal, the alarm on 120/150. They call that the guard frequency, GUARD. So sometimes when you're flying around across countries, the air traffic controller might ask you, hey, 4-1 Victor Uniform, can you help us out? Oh yeah, go ahead. Hey, will you monitor guard and tell us if you hear an ELT? And so then you, as the pilot, would turn on 120/150 and you would listen to see if you hear the ELT alarm sounding on your frequency. And they might ask multiple aircraft covering a multiple large area. And whichever aircraft hears the ELT signal the loudest, that's where they're going to zero in on their search and rescue efforts. Nobody's asking questions. Nobody's too confused. We're going to keep moving forward. So we have something called DF VHF direction finder. Say there's some remote areas, mountainous areas, maybe desert, Alaska. It's possible that flight service station could help you if you get lost on a long cross country. They call it a DF steer, direction finder steer. The flight service specialist will be able to determine your direction from the flight service station and be able to give you headings to an airport. You would know this because there are letters VHF/DF appearing on the chart supplement for the airport listed that indicates the flight service station has this direction finding equipment. To use the VHF/DF facilities for assistance, to locate your position, you must have a VHF transmitter and receiver. Well, yes, we have VHF transmitter and receiver. That's just our push to talk, our good old fashioned radio that we speak over top of. This is kind of older technology. It still exists, especially in some of those remote locations that they're speaking about. I think that, especially with the onset of ADSB, that typically for us, our better strategy would try to get a hold of air traffic control and use air traffic control services. If you need to tell ATC that you're lost, by all means, let them know. You can also be a little bit more discreet, and you could say something like, Indianapolis approach, 4 Victor Uniform. Could you give me a vector? I'm looking for a heading. Can you point me in the direction of Eagle Creek Airport? But yes, if you're lost, you can admit that you're lost, but you could also do it a little more tactfully and ask what would be a good heading to head back home to Eagle Creek Airport. What would be a good vector? With our technology, they'll give you a squawk code, and then they'll be able to see your radar blip on the screen. But this older technology exists, this VHF DF direction steer, direction finder, it exists, and probably not going to hear a lot about it here in Flatland, Indiana. But if you get lost on a big, long cross country out in the desert or over the mountainous area, it could be a way for a flight service station to help you out. All right, we're going to keep moving forward. Nobody's asking questions. So these are the C's. So this is very, very important. You will have multiple test questions on this, and this, could really be practical application for you all as you learn to go fly airplanes and learn how to navigate. So everybody usually says the 5 C's. This slide says the 6 C's. I'm probably going to have more like 7 or 8 different C's that can help you out. So if you get lost, LOST, what can we do? These are called your lost procedures. These are the lost procedures, the C's. We have some options such as circle, climb, confess, communicate, comply, conserve. I would possibly add some such as check compass, check compass. I would add something such as cross-check VOR, cross-check VOR. So why are these lost procedures going to be so effective to helping us getting unlost? Well, the first one says circle. It says circle so you only have to find yourself once. So the idea is that you are looking out the window, you're trying to get yourself unlost, you're looking for landmarks, you're looking for visual landmarks out the window, something that's large enough that you could possibly find yourself using the sectional chart. Things that are good, lakes, like a there are man-made objects you might see out the window, and they're like the God-made objects out the window. The more like God-made objects, like a lake, is probably going to be easier for you to be able to spot because each lake has its own different shape. Sometimes you look out the window and you see a large road. Well, that might be helpful, but that large road looks just like every other large road. You might see a city. Cities aren't bad, but some cities could look like other cities, and you might not actually be positively identifying the landmark out the window with the correct landmark that's on your sectional chart. So lakes are one of the best that I would recommend. A lake circle. So if you see a nice big lake out the window that has a prominent feature, circle that area and stay in that same area. Prevent yourself from getting more lost. You've already wandered to this spot in the sky, and you don't want to continue wandering to new places. You don't want to wander and possibly go bust airspace you're not supposed to be in. So circle around the known prominent landmark out your window as you continue to follow the lost procedures. I've known a few pilots. I have known a few pilots that would circle water towers. It could be a possibility. It could be a nice looking big water tower out the window, and you might be able to circle it and read the words on the side of the water tower. I'd be lying if I said I ain't never done that. Just take it with caution. Remember your minimum safe altitudes that we discussed in the last chapter. You don't want to get too low or too slow. And unfortunately, it's kind of a joke. There's like a lot of towns named American Water. Isn't that a good one? There's a lot of towns named American Water. So just be careful. It used to be that all the water towers would say the local town on the side of the water tower, but more and more we're seeing a lot of them say American Water. So that's circle. Why is it a good idea? We don't want to get more unlost. While you're trying to get unlost, you don't want to get more lost. So circle the same area. Climb. Why is climb such a good option? Climb is such a good option because the higher altitude that you get, the better view you're going to have to see other landmarks. Why is climbing such a better option? Your VHF radio operates on line of sight. Line of sight. So if you raise your aircraft to higher altitudes, you will have better reception. You'll have better reception on your VHF radio. That includes both your ability to communicate with air traffic control, flight service, and also your ability to use the VOR because it is also a line of sight VHF nav aid, radio aid nav aid. Climb. So climbing up higher is going to help you out. You'll get to see a better picture of the local area and have better radio coverage. Confess. Confess is yet another C. If you can't figure out where you are at a higher altitude, admit to yourself that you are lost. So the whole idea is we've all heard the story of the guy who's lost, passes every gas station and never stops to ask for directions. And he just keeps telling himself, I'm not lost, I'm not lost. Well, that's not the best strategy when you're in the aircraft. We cannot create a situation where we start to run low on fuel and run out of gas. Then we have even bigger issue ahead of us. So if you feel like you've lost situational awareness, if you feel like you are LOST, it's okay to confess it to yourself and start going into your lost procedures. Do not continue flying in possibly the wrong direction if you're not certain. So confess it to yourself that you are lost. If you need to confess it to ATC or ask for their services, by all means. We'd much rather, get a little lost and have some help getting back home than to have to, have a forced landing in a field because we run out of gas and traveling the wrong direction and following into airspaces we're not supposed to be into. So confess that you're lost and follow these procedures, the C's. We've made our way into communicate. Communicate. contact ATC, contact air traffic control. Advise ATC that you are lost and that you need vectors to an airport. You cannot get in trouble for saying that you're lost, especially as a student pilot. It's pretty expected that student pilots are going to need a little bit more hand-holding and have more issues. You should identify yourself as a student pilot whenever you're on the radio. Indianapolis approach, this is 4-1 Victor uniform, student pilot with request. That would be a really good radio call. And then they can come back, 4-1 Victor uniform, go ahead. Student pilot, I was hoping to get a vector to Eagle Creek Airport. So if you need to tell them you're lost, by all means, communicate with air traffic control. Now, here's the big thing. Who are you going to communicate to? Would you rather communicate at tower, clearance delivery, approach, center? Well, the lesson is that you're not going to have any luck getting radar services unless you contact an air traffic controller that has radar. So last time we covered the AFD, the chart supplement, and remember we showed the R with a circle. Those are the controllers that have radar. So if you call tower, if you call clearance delivery, if you call a controller that does not have radar technology, they will not be able to give you the services you're looking for. You need to contact a controller that has radar technology, and those controllers in the chart supplement in the airport facilities directory are the controllers that have an R circle near their frequency. So when you're doing your flight planning and you know that you're going to go flying to different airports in different areas, you would be wise to write down those frequencies on your nav log so that way you have those frequencies at hand and you don't have to do extra looking up of information while you're flying an airplane. They call that cockpit resource management. So that was us talking about communicate. The next is comply, another C, comply. So what does comply mean? Comply means follow. Follow these instructions, follow these C's, follow if air traffic control gives you a vector, if air traffic control gives you a heading, if air traffic control tells you to squawk a code, comply, follow those procedures that they are explaining to you. The next says conserve. Conserve. So what do we mean by conserve? Pull back the power. If you're on a long cross country and you got the power forward and you're burning extra gallons per hour, traveling extra fast, and you think that you're getting lost, you would be wise to pull back the throttle. Throttle down, slow it down. There's no reason to burn more gas and travel more fast and get more lost in possibly the wrong direction. So if you are getting the feeling that you're not certain of your current location, if you're getting the feeling that you're losing situational awareness, you should conserve. Throttle down, conserve your fuel, adjust your power setting as needed. It says if all else fails, we can call for help on the emergency frequency, which is 12150. Mayday, mayday, mayday. You can squawk emergency code 7700, and you're going to get some attention at that point for sure. Some possible C's that I've discussed to you verbally that are not on the slide could be things such as cross-check VOR. Cross-check VOR. Remember our VOR is that ground-based navigation station? The VOR is a ground-based navigation station. You can dial in that VOR frequency and center the needle. If the needle centers with a TO2 indication, that would be a heading that would take you towards the station. If the needle centers with a FM from indication, then that would be a possible heading to take you directly away from the station. They call that homing, H-O-M-I-N-G. Homing would be the simple fact of centering the needle with a TO2 indication, flying that heading, and would generally take you to the station. In the Indianapolis area, our station is called Brickyard. That is 115.3, 115.30. And if you centered a needle with a TO indication and flew that heading, that would generally take you back to the Indianapolis area. Another C that we mentioned verbally out loud would be check compass. So it's very common, especially in a lot of older aircraft, you might possibly get in a bad situation where your heading indicator, your directional gyro, can slip and no longer hold the exact heading that it's supposed to. Even a brand new DG right out the box is guaranteed to precess at least 3 degrees every 15 minutes. That's something we covered from the from chapter about flight instruments. So it's very common that pilots get off course because they were looking at an instrument that is actually giving them bad indications. So be sure to cross-check to your compass, your magnetic compass. In our aircraft, that's done with the magnetometer and the wingtip, and all the corrections are laid out for you on the G1000 screen. On your Cirrus aircraft, we actually have a magnetic compass as well. So these are all really good, important C's. These are procedures for lost procedures. That is a lot of information. That's a lot of really important information for y'all. Does anybody have any questions about the C's, lost communications, lost procedures?
Hey, if you look in the chat, it says we keep having issues with the service. Like you keep cutting in and out, and I've noticed it among other people too. So it's maybe it might be yours.
Okay, so I've hit the button. I'm no longer sharing my screen. And I see the chat is lit up, so I hit the chat. Can you repeat the last thing regarding climb? Connection kind of froze, cutting in and out. So we're talking about climb. So the whole idea of climb is that if you are at a low altitude, then you are not going to have good perspective for line of sight. If you are at a low altitude, you will not have good perspective for line of sight. So if you want to see out the window to possibly see some good landmarks, you won't be able to see very far if you're at a low altitude. So climbing to a higher altitude can put you at a better perspective to see extra landmarks out the window, and that might help you get unlost. Climbing to a higher altitude is such a good idea because if you climb, now your radio antennas, your transmitters and receivers on your aircraft have better line of sight. So if you want to contact air traffic control, if you want to contact flight service, I would recommend air traffic control. I would contact air traffic control, somebody with radar, and you'll have better ability to contact that air traffic controller if you were at a higher altitude. It's just like, remember the old-fashioned TV antennas? If you had a very tall TV antenna in your yard, you would get better TV reception. So you have an antenna on the roof of your airplane, and if you climb to a higher altitude, you're going to be able to get better reception with your VHF communication radios and your nav radios. And then your visual sight, your eyesight will be better at a higher altitude to try to locate a good landmark. So thank you for bringing that up. When I'm in full screen mode, sharing my screen, I don't always see the chats that pop up. So that was from Amaya, and that was us repeating information about climbing for the lost procedures. Great. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the participation. Okay. So I think that was our actual last slide for for that section here. I'm going to click the button, and so that way we can see it ourselves. Here was our 6 C's. Again, I probably added a few more. We had circle, climb, confess, communicate, comply, conserve, and then I would add cross check VOR, and I would add check compass. So I would add those. From there, I can click the button one more time, and the next slide is questions. So I'm not getting a lot of questions from anybody here. So at this point, I'm closing the PowerPoint from that we just covered. I'm going to Blackboard and I'm opening up our content. We have another PowerPoint that'll move us into the next chapter. You know, this is an open forum, open discussion. So at any point, anybody can raise questions and we can have back and forth collaborative information. It doesn't have to be me just barking at you. So it's open. It's open for questions or thoughts as I click buttons to get another PowerPoint up for us to continue for chapter 5. So basically, what I'm seeing on my end is that we have another PowerPoint. We have one more PowerPoint for chapter 5. Once we complete this, we're basically in test mode. So we're going to be thinking ahead about, any sort of review, any sort of questions that you guys have as well. If you're following along, you're clicking chapter 5 in your Blackboard content, and we're loading up the next PowerPoint, which is called Radio Procedures. And this one says Communication and Flight Information. And I'm going to click the button to start screen sharing on my end. Do you guys see the PowerPoint on your side now?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. So we're seeing communication and flight information. We're all staying awake. We got a few more minutes. We're going to keep pumping for a few more minutes, and then we'll be taking a break. I'm clicking the button for slideshow. It should make it full screen for us. Communication and flight information. Radio procedures. This is chapter 5. So it's telling us that the communication radios for general aviation aircraft, they transmit on frequencies 118 to 135.97. What does that mean? It means basically 118 to 136. So those are VHF, very high frequencies. This is for our communications radio. Communications. I remember we had several homeworks ago where I had a lot of students giving incorrect answers on some VOR box questions where the assignment was to click on the frequency that would go in your communication radio, click on the frequency that would go in your navigation radio. And so what you're really learning is that the communication radios frequencies are basically 118 to 136. It doesn't actually touch 136. The highest frequency we see is 135.95. The VOR, which is navigation, the navigation frequencies are just less than that. So like the once you get less than 118, that's when we're getting into the navigation frequencies. In the real aircraft, it wouldn't be as big of an issue because the G1000 system or any avionics display, it would not let you input an incorrect frequency to begin with. But for you all, as Private Pilot 100, you're learning that there's a difference between communication frequencies and navigation frequencies. Our comm frequency is 118 to 136. Our communication equipment in the cockpit is actually a combination transmitter and receiver. You call that a transceiver. Ooh, transceiver. Nice. They put it into the same piece of equipment, and this radio technology is dependent on line of sight, which is again why it was such an important idea to climb to higher altitudes if you're having issues. Communication equipment. Awesome. Only one person can talk on the radio at the time. So when you push the button down to transmit, you are the sole person that can transmit on that radio frequency. If somebody else, if another aircraft nearby pushes the button at the exact same moment that you push the button, push to talk, then you block each other and nobody hears any clear communication. Instead, everybody talks on top of each other over that frequency. So it's really important that before you push to talk, before you push the button to speak, count to 3 or 5 to make sure that nobody's about to push the button exactly when you are. When you let off the button, count for a few seconds as well. Give time and space so that way only one person talks on the radio at the time. If it's an uncontrolled airport like a CTAF, it's a free-for-all, everybody for themselves. But if you're at a towered airport, or if you're talking to an air traffic controller, if you're talking to on a frequency that's designated to be an air traffic control frequency, then the air traffic controller is kind of the referee. The air traffic controller is the central point person that's going to make the communications. So on an air traffic control frequency, ATC talks to you, your airplane, 41 Victor Uniform. 41 Victor Uniform talks back to air traffic control, Indianapolis approach. It is not encouraged. Do not do it. If you're 41 Victor Uniform and you want to talk to 42 Victor Uniform, it is not the appropriate place to do it when you're on a control frequency. So if you're on a frequency used by air traffic control, that is for you to talk to ATC, for ATC to talk to you. When you're at a CTAF frequency, an uncontrolled frequency, that's when the airplanes can talk to each other. So we're just repeating the fact that a uncontrolled airport, the airplanes talk to each other. At a controlled airport, the airplanes talk to the air traffic controller. The air traffic controller talks to the airplanes. So we're moving forward. The next slide here is very important. This is a very important slide. This is about UTC, Coordinated Universal Time, Zulu time. So I'm grading some of your homeworks, and there's a lot of you guys confused about this UTC Zulu time. So time begins in Greenwich, England, and that is Zulu time. Military time is a related but separate concept. So military time means 24-hour clock. We typically, as Americans, go off of a 12-hour clock, and then when it gets to be 1300, then we call that 1 p.m. 1400, we call that 2 p.m. So that's military time. Military time is a 24-hour clock. Zulu time is the local time in Greenwich, England, in military. So Zulu time is based off of the 24-hour clock, yes. But Zulu time is explaining what the local time is in Greenwich, England. So here in Flatland, Indiana, we're about 5 hours away from Zulu time, 4 hours of its daylight savings. And we covered a lot of that with our airport facilities directory conversations from last session as well. So this is just a map showing you the 24 different time zones and the 24 different possibilities of Zulu conversions that you might experience. Okay, we'll keep moving forward. Here's some more possible vocabulary words for everybody. CTAF, Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. Again, that's what you're going to use at an uncontrolled airport. It's the frequency used to broadcast your position. You could turn the lights on for the airport environment. You could also receive airport advisories. So the Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, that's what we have at Eagle Creek on 122.8. 122.80 is our CTAF frequency at Eagle Creek. That would be the frequency you use as an aircraft to talk to other aircraft in the traffic pattern, Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. Okay, next says Unicom. Unicom. It's kind of more of an air to ground frequency. It's more of an air to ground frequency. So it's typically not aircraft talking to other aircraft. If it's a Unicom, it's typically somebody in the air trying to talk to somebody on the ground. We're not talking about air traffic controllers. We're talking about a uncontrolled frequency. A Unicom would be more like if you're talking to the FBO, the fixed space operator, the company on the field that would sell you gas, the company on the field that would possibly tell you if there's a rental car, if there's a courtesy car, the company on the field who's going to provide you services. Ask them if your limo is ready for whenever you land to pick up your very important passengers. So Unicom would be talking to the FBO, the services on the ground at that airport. The next vocabulary word is ground. radio communications outlet. So you could call it GCO for ground communications outlet. You could call it RCO for radio communications outlet. A lot of people think about it as a repeater tower, and it's a ground-based antenna, and it connects via telephone lines. So your VHF radio could then get in contact with somebody else, typically air traffic control, although possibly flight service station, depending upon the actual station. So a lot of examples for this would be for clearance delivery. So as we keep discussing different types of air traffic controllers and their different roles, clearance delivery, if you as an instrument pilot, you would need to contact clearance delivery to get clearance for you ever to launch into the weather. So if there's IFR clouds, 91-155 tells us that as VFR pilots, we got to keep at least 3 miles visibility, 500 below, 1,000 above, 2,000 horizontal from any of those clouds. If you want to be an instrument pilot and you want to get an instrument clearance, you would have to coordinate your instrument departure with clearance delivery first. And if you're on the ground, you might do that through one of these GCOs, RCOs, remote communications outlet, ground communications outlet. So that's one very good reason why we might find ourselves using these communications outlets as pilots. For you, even as a VFR pilot, it's possible that you could open your flight plan, file your flight plan, close your flight plan with flight service station using those same frequencies. Ground communications outlet. Okay. The next vocabulary word is airport advisory areas. It could be at selected airports where flight service station is on the field. Prior to entering this advisory area, you could contact the local flight service station for airport advisories, for traffic advisories. This is probably a service that you would see at the TURSA. So remember earlier in today's slideshow, we had the gray ring surrounding a Delta airport, which would be a TURSA. This would be a very good example of where you would see an airport advisory area. It's a very similar idea to air traffic control, only it's actually conducted through flight service station. So like a Bravo or Charlie airspace, they have air traffic controller that runs the radar. Yes. Delta airspace typically does not have radar. The deltas that do have radar could possibly have TURSA airspace, which is the gray. And if it is a TURSA, then it's likely that that TURSA radar is actually managed by flight service station, not necessarily air traffic control. And that's where they're calling an airport advisory area. So your procedures as the pilot are the same, just you're talking to a different person and they're calling an airport advisory area instead of a straight up control zone like we would have for Bravo or Charlie airspace. Okay, so I'm going to check our Zoom chat, make sure nobody's trying to talk too much. I'm going to hit the button that says stop share. And nobody else has posted any new messages. We're about at our halfway point, so we're getting ready to take our break. But if there's any thoughts or questions, now would be a great time to bring those up. Okay, well, I'm going to hit the button and we'll be back in 10 minutes after a short break. Thank you. We're going on a short break. We'll be back in 10 minutes.
What's up, guys?
Howdy.
You need to take that dumbass background off.
Why?
It's so stupid.
Now I'm on the beach.
Yeah, you're on the beach, huh?
Yeah.
I'm in the mountains.
Where's your panda head?
It's in the closet. She's been bothering me the whole class. Come here, kitty.
Is that, what was that sound?
It's a cat. Oh, it's good call. Right.
Hey Cameron, what's your cat's name?
It's actually my buddy's cat. Her name is Lucy. She's a little bit.
Hey, I got a cat. 1 second. It's deaf. It can't hear anything.
Oh no. Yeah.
I think I might need to change my background so you can actually see it. Wait.
Background dog.
Trying to get her to jump up on my desk, but she won't.
Check him out. Wait. There you go.
Oh, it's fluffy.
Yeah, you can't hear a thing.
Really?
Yeah.
Snaps and nothing.
Dude, I think you need to
He's
give
so
that cat a
cute. I
haircut.
love him.
Nick, what are you doing? You trying to show off your cars? He turned his camera off after that.
Hi, kitty. She won't jump up on the desk. I was trying. What do you do?
Oh, whose cat is that?
It's Karen.
She hates my phone charger.
Ah, dude, if I sit here and start messing around my phone charger, same thing. Boy or girl?
Girl, her name's Lucy.
Oh, nice.
A couple times during class, I was getting really mad.
Dude, if I sit here and start like writing stuff and I'm not paying attention to the cat, he'll start biting my pencil. So how fat is everybody getting, or is it just me?
Very. Just you.
Just me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Well,
pretty
you-
sure.
Running
Pretty
is
sure that's
still
just you,
allowed,
man.
Christian.
Oh yeah.
How's your cat there, Cameron?
Yeah,
Well, you
she's
guys- Your guys' metabolism is ridiculous, then.
She seems to be enjoying this with the cat.
she will not let go, bro.
Speak of the devil, dude. Speak of the
Do what?
devil.
Very ugly cat.
See what I tell you.
Whoa!
It's the rapist cat.
It's the rapist cat. Come here. Hey, boy.
Oh my god, I'm not gonna do
you
that
have
with
a
this cat.
story as to why I call it the rapist cat?
Because of this right here. Watch. Let me see if he does it. Right there. Just will force himself on your face, whether you like it or not. And he doesn't rub up. Ow! He doesn't rub up against you. He headbutts. I don't know if you guys saw that. Look, Riley.
Dylan, what is your screen right now?
I don't want to talk about it.
Riley. Headbutts.
See if I can find a back. Oh, I'm still space.
Well, bro.
See if I can find something.
Dude, does your cat play with other cat toys, or he just plays with like extension cords and shit?
Extension cords. Like, there's literally nothing else that she plays with.
Yeah, same thing. Weird. Like, if my girlfriend's walking around and she has like bought it. If he's walking around with like a necklace, same thing.
Oh man, I'm like definitely allergic to cats. They honestly kind of freak me out a little bit.
Yeah.
Not gonna
Something weird about a predator, dude. Especially
Dude, I got
when,
mauled by one when I was a kid. All right, I went to my best friend's house, and his cat just like mauled me the second I walked in the door.
Oh my god, how big was the cat? Was it like a Tiger King cat?
Dude,
Bro,
I was
okay,
young.
you watched
all right,
that?
so-
That's my new favorite show.
What the hell is up with that show?
It is so like white trash and just hilarious. I love it. Like
I
he
like
pulls
how
up in a.
I like how everybody's like pretending that they care about these cats, and everybody's out to just get money. Like especially that Carol Baskins lady. She's just like,
She
what
killed
my
him.
God,
She definitely killed her husband.
Oh
She
yeah,
killed her
definitely.
husband, bro.
He's like, what if we grab all of their cats and put them in cages at my place?
Dude, have you guys met that one guy like Joe Lowe? Does he do like with the Ferrari and everything else?
Dude,
I haven't finished it yet.
no. Dude, the only person that makes sense, the only person that is level-headed is the coke dealer who dismembered a body. That's the only guy who makes
Mario.
sense.
Mario.
Yes!
Bro,
comes
what kind
together,
of show are
dude.
you guys watching? Fuck.
It's a 7-episode documentary on Netflix. Take the time and watch it.
Called Tiger Kings, dude. The guy ran for president. He's like, I'm broke as shit. I'm gay.
Dude, that was so
I
funny.
refuse to wear a suit. He's walking around with tigers.
It is so
I thought
funny.
he was joking. He's like, I'm gay. He said it like multiple times.
Yeah, the gay where he came out and said he was gay first loop, and then it was the 3-way marriage. That
Yeah, well, that's the
done.
thing, though.
I had to
That's
pause it and take a minute.
That's the thing, though. They were all straight. They were all
Really?
straight guys that he married. And, like, he's like, hey. Yeah, he's like,
That's
hey, man.
gay. That's gay.
He's like, oh, yeah,
you can't
trust
undo
me.
that.
He's like, I ain't gay. Dude, you had sex with a guy. Yes, you're bi. You're at least bi, dude.
Hey,
Just
wait,
good,
hold
you
on.
know.
No. He said no homo, so it's okay.
No, he didn't.
Hey
That's
guys,
the
we
thing.
got to try to keep our conversations politically correct. We don't want to offend anybody or anything.
No, yeah, of course not. But it's just you got to see this. You just got to see it. It's he's absolutely out of this
Watch.
world.
Must watch.
If only we could get so excited about aviation. Aviation topics.
We are. It's just this thing is just engulfing our lives right now since we can't fly planes. We got to watch this guy mess around with tigers.
So I'm seeing Chance. I didn't see Chance in here earlier, so I see you now. I'm putting that in the digital grade book. Thank you for making it, Chance.
Oh, you're welcome.
Carol Baskins did it.
Oh,
So-
she definitely did it.
So I feel like, we've had a break. Everybody's excited. We're communicating. We're thinking about aviation stuff and things. Basically, just to keep you posted, we're getting ready to finish chapter 5 slides. There's a lot of new assignments up. They're practice assignments. You can take practice tests, practice midterms. A lot of those are up. We're going to continue trucking today. We're going to finish chapter 5 is what I anticipate. I anticipate that next class, which will be Wednesday, we'll start off with a review session, a chance for anybody to ask any questions, because you're going to have some time between now and Wednesday to take all those different practice tests to finish up your homeworks. And if you have any questions before the actual real test launches, then we can cover that at the end of class here or at the beginning of class next time. And it won't be very long. We'll be launching a chapter 5 midterm test. So it'll include chapters 1 through 5. I think that it's going to be probably a little more than 60. So 60 questions is the typical FAA test. This one will probably be more like 70 questions, get a few extra ones in there to give you a chance at them. I think the FAA actual written test gives you a time limit of 2.5 hours, something, and I'd probably put the same 2.5 hour time limit on the test. What I anticipate is that when we launch that test, whenever you click go to start it, that's when the time will start. And so depending on how long our review session is going to go at the beginning of next class, we could create a larger window. So, you could go ahead and start the test right then after our review session. If you had a 2.5 hour window and wanted to do it right then, that's fine. If you would rather, have a longer review session, you want to ask more questions, then, we could create an open window and just make sure that you've completed the test before our next meeting after that. So basically, I anticipate that we'll finish chapter 5 today. We'll have a review session for the midterm chapter 5 test at the beginning of Wednesday. And then the window will be open and you'll have to complete that chapter 5 midterm test before we meet on Monday. And then Monday we'll be going over the chapter 5 midterm test. I got somebody typing in the chat. Jake saying he's having a lot of freezing and rubber banding issues. So all I can do is just kind of slow down and yep. So I'm going to slow down and just, say it more slowly for everybody that next class period, Wednesday, we will start with a review session. And then after we finish, any questions that you have, then we're going to open up chapter 5 midterm test. Chapter 5 midterm test you will need to complete before we get together on Monday. When we get together on Monday, the goal will be to review that test, which will be chapter 5 new information plus review of all the old information, midterm chapters 1 through 5. So they were saying that there was some freezing, so I'm kind of slowing down, trying to repeat myself. We're going to continue moving with chapter 5 PowerPoints, continue covering material. When we get together on Wednesday, it'll be open floor for you to bring up any questions that you have before we launch chapter 5 midterm test on Wednesday. You will need to complete that midterm test before Monday. So on Wednesday, we will start. On Wednesday, we will have review sessions. When we're done with review, the chapter 5 midterm test will open up. It'll be 2.5 hours. You will have 2.5 hours to take that test from the time you hit go to when you have to submit it. And you'll need to submit that before Monday. If we were together in class, it would be a closed book, closed notes test. I have no way of being able to enforce that. So I would encourage you to study for the test and try to take the test, closed book and closed notes, because that's what's going to happen when you take the real FAA written exam. But there's no way for me to enforce it. So I've tried to repeat myself a few times. I hear a few people saying that they're having some freezing rubber band issues. I've tried to repeat it a few times. We're going to launch Chapter 5 midterm test after our session on Wednesday, and you will need to complete it before Monday. It'll be about 70 questions. You'll be about 2.5 hour window. So is anybody still confused? Did I repeat it a few times? Is everybody up to speed? Maybe so, maybe not. Any feedback is appreciated. Maybe you're not hearing me.
Good. I heard it.
Okay. So, yep, Maya, she was one of the ones saying she's had issues. So we repeated that a few times. Hopefully she's getting it. Okay. So Kai is having issue here. So I'm hitting the button to share our Zoom meeting to Kai. For some reason, he jumped out. Hearing a lot of beeping. I don't know if that's through somebody else's microphone or if that's me. So if Kai jumps in the room, that's the positive thing. He's trying to message me. He's having troubles. But it looks like everybody else is in, so I'm not sure what else we can do other than sit and wait for him, but I don't know if it makes sense to wait too terribly long. So hopefully Kai will be able to jump in here with us. I think I'm gonna move on to start finishing our slide work unless anybody else has thoughts or questions. Kai says he's back in, so hopefully that's a positive. And I'm looking in the chat box. I don't see anybody else typing up. Kai, there he is. Okay, I see Kai. Awesome. Cool.
And every time I tried to join back in, it wouldn't let me. It would just sit on the launch page. It wouldn't do anything.
Gosh, crazy technology. I am so surprised we've gotten this far. We are improving. We're all getting more technology fluent, and I appreciate everybody's patience. I believe everybody is in. I'm going to hit the button that says screen share, and we'll see what's going on with Chapter 5. Are you guys seeing PowerPoint Chapter 5? Is anybody up? We are seeing Chapter 5 PowerPoint. Yes, I'm seeing some yes
Yeah, it's
heads.
looking good.
Cool, awesome. Well, hopefully we can keep moving forward here. I'm going to hit the button to make it full screen. Okay, so it looks like we should have full screen Chapter 5 PowerPoint. And this is what we just covered here before we took a breather, before we took a break. If we're going to keep moving forward, I'll hit the button. And here is a nice chart that is explaining some of the information of the different types of frequencies for us. So we had a Unicom frequency. there are some established Unicom frequencies. That's what you're seeing here. These are some common Unicom frequencies, and some times that you might possibly use them. Here's an important one for the test: 10 miles out. So when would you be expected as a pilot to start making radio calls? I repeat myself. When, as a pilot, should you expect to start making radio calls? 10 miles out. That is the book answer. In the real world, pilots might make radio calls earlier or later, but the book answer would be 10 miles out. That'd be a good time to start making your initial radio calls to let the airport know that you're inbound approaching. Here's a question. This will be on one of the written exams. It's asking about a multicom frequency, 122.9. It's kind of more of a history lesson than anything else, but if it's a multicom, they call it a 122.9. It has multiple uses. That frequency has multiple uses, 122.9. And again, it's the same ideas. You would use that frequency to communicate. You know, if you're in a taxi before you take off, if you're entering the traffic pattern, if you're 10 miles away from the airport. And then they also add some instrument possibilities if you're shooting an instrument approach. Basically, for a lot of the airplanes that are going to shoot instrument approaches, if you are not an instrument rated pilot, that can be confusing for you. So imagine that if there's an airplane that says they're at the final approach fix, or they are 10 miles out on the RNAV 21, typically that pilot is setting up for a long final. That's typically what's going on. So your standard instrument approach, typically your instrument approaches are going to be based on the idea of the airplane coming down a long extended center line, a long final. I'm getting some flashing on my screen, so let me hit stop share. It looks like somebody's trying to chat with us, so I'm going to open this up. And I guess Nick is having some freezing issues right now. Kai says he's having them as well. And so is Amaya. I mean, you know, yeah. So I mean, I hear what you're saying. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do on my end. I want to be positive. You know, I can pause and wait for it to stabilize. I can shut the thing down and restart it. You know, he's saying the words, I can make a video and repost it later, but you know, the big problem with something like that is then nobody has any chance to interject. Nobody has any chance to bring up a question from say it again. Nobody has any chances of that nature. You know, which is just kind of a real bummer then, you know, if somebody did have a question. So I think the better strategy, you know, would be to try to use the technology if possible. But I agree that if so, he's saying that he's going to email his questions if you have questions. So if you have questions, you can feel free to email questions as well, or type your questions. Yeah, so I mean, I hear you. I'm hearing everybody saying that they're having issues, and I, you know, want to help, but there's not a whole lot that I think I can do other than keep going. But it's a bummer if it's freezing. I can shut this one down and try to launch another one if we think that's going to be a better strategy for today. What I will do is, you know, I'm going to talk to my boss, you know, and I'm going to explain to him that we're having issues, but this is the format that I've been instructed to do. So at this point, you know, our department has invested money into this, you know, software for us to be able to transmit and record and have video conferencing with everybody. This is how I've been set up and instructed to do it. I'm not trying to ignore you. You know, I see people posting issues that they're having issues. I see people posting that, possible ideas of recording. And I'm not against any of that if we think that's the answer. I just think that, it's a bummer because, there are other people that are making this work. And does the video recorder have to be on Zoom or another program? I mean, Zoom is just the way that, our department has got me set up right now. So, I think that, they got us, paying extra money for this Zoom software. And so that's the route that they've chose to go so far. The route that our department has chose to go so far is Zoom. If you're thinking that there's some other software we're supposed to be using, by all means, feel free to communicate that information. Just this is the route that I've been instructed that I'm supposed to go. Okay, well, I want to do everything I can. I'm given the screen time to stabilize. I not seeing any more questions popping up. Maybe it's getting better. Maybe it's getting worse. I think I'm supposed to continue on and try to cover information for y'all. So let's see if I can try to share our screen with you. The enter button. So I'm thinking you guys see the PowerPoint screen now, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Awesome. Cool. Thank you for the feedback. And basically what we're getting at is that there are different types of frequencies. A lot of these frequencies on this chart are giving you the CTAF frequencies. If there's not an airport control tower, if there's not an air traffic control tower in operation, then you're going to use self-announced procedures. If there's not a control tower, then it'll be self-announced procedures, which is probably going to be like on CTAF, possibly Unicom or Multicom, but it's really more of a CTAF environment is what's going on according to this chart. And all these are the same answers. 10 miles away is a typical time that you would go ahead and make radio calls, entering or exiting the traffic pattern, things of that nature. If I click the right button, we can see another slide. I guess I can click the button to see if anybody else is trying to shoot more messages at us. Looks like we're in the same, so I share it again. And moving forward. So here's some very basic information about your radio calls. Here's some very basic information about your radio calls. Remember, when you were younger, they would talk about a good news report, would answer the W's, who, what, when, where. So that's kind of the same information that we're trying to cover with a radio call. So some things that we're having to figure out, who is it that we're calling? So in our example, maybe you're about to call up Indianapolis Approach. So who are you calling? Indianapolis Approach. Who are you? Well, you are 4-1 Victor Uniform. Where are you? You are just off Eagle Creek, 5 miles to the west. What do you want to do? You want to get flight following to Terre Haute, Hotel Uniform Foxtrot Airport at 4,500 feet. So how would that whole radio call sound? Well, then that whole radio call would be Indianapolis Approach, 4-1 Victor Uniform. I am 5 miles west of Eagle Creek Airport, looking for flight following to Hotel Uniform Foxtrot at 4,500. So those would be all the elements for a radio call to get a hold of Indianapolis Approach. They have radar, so that way they can follow you, flight follow to from Eagle Creek to Terre Haute. How far away? It's talking about the distance. The distance of your initial call depends on the type of airspace. So the more busy the airspace, the more ahead you should make your radio call. So if it's a very busy airspace like a Bravo, like Chicago, New York, Miami, Atlanta, you're going to want to make that initial call way earlier. You might be 30, 40 miles away, and you can make that call way early. If it's a smaller airport like a Charlie, like in Indianapolis, you might only call them, a few miles outside the airspace, more like 20 instead of 30, and then a Delta might only be 10 miles. So again, discretion is you as the PIC. As the PIC, it is your discretion how far away, but the general rule of thumb is that the busier the airspace, the farther away you want to make your radio calls. Let them know you're coming. And you need to tell them who you are, who you're talking to, where you're at, and what do you want. Those are the basic elements of a radio call. Basic elements of a radio call. So, okay, I don't see anybody trying to post or communicate here. All right, we'll keep moving. So we'll keep moving forward. And basically, we're going to go over a few different types. We're going to go over a few different types of air traffic controllers. So this one says clearance delivery. Clearance delivery is an air traffic controller that we're going to talk to predominantly on the ground. So when you're on the ground, typically at a Charlie or a Bravo airport, your first step, one of your first steps is be talk to clearance delivery. Typically you would get the information first. So you can listen to the ATIS first. And after you have the ATIS, you know that it's information Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, whatever it may be. Then you can contact clearance delivery. For clearance delivery, you would let the air traffic controller know what your plans are with this particular flight. If you go to Evansville Airport, you would have to talk to clearance delivery before you can leave Evansville Airport on a solo cross country. So you'd call clearance delivery, foreign victory uniform. I'm on the ground outside the FBO. I'll be doing a VFR flight back to Eagle Creek. That'd be a northeastern departure at 3,500 feet. So you give the information that's necessary to clearance delivery. So that way, clearance delivery can develop a flight briefing strip. They have like a small briefing strip that will follow your airplane throughout its multiple air traffic control facilities. So clearance delivery creates those strips. Clearance delivery. If you're an instrument pilot, there'll be a lot more information that they'll need so they can facilitate the separation of IFR to other IFR airplanes. But as a VFR airplane, probably just the basics of what's your destination, what's your altitude, are you a VFR departure, what direction from the airport. Clearance delivery. The words at the bottom have changed. Now it says the words ground control. So imagine when you're talking to ground control, that controller, that air traffic controller is going to live in the tower, and that air traffic controller looks out the window down on the ground and controls the airplanes moving around on the pavement. Ground control. Typically, ground control frequencies are 121 point something. So a lot of the ground facilities are 121 point something. And the air traffic controllers typically do not tell you 121. They might tell you contact ground on 0.9er. And then you as the pilot should know that most of the ground frequencies are 121 point something. So if air traffic control tells you to contact ground on 0.9er, they're actually telling you to contact 121.9. Ground control is who is going to give you the clearance to leave the apron to get into the taxiway structure all the way up to the hold short line for the runway. Ground control. If you remember some of our slides from before, we have a movement, non-movement boundary line. That is the single dash with the single solid. The movement, non-movement boundary line is the single solid, single dash. And if you want to cross that line, you need to have clearance from ground. You get clearance from ground control to enter the movement area. And then from there, you would get clearance from ground control to get all the way to the active runway, to the hold short line. When we get to the active runway, the hold short line, that's when we're going to start talking to the next air traffic controller. So at the bottom, we see the words tower. So all these controllers, could probably be living in the tower, looking out the glass window to do their job. That's why all these pictures are showing these air traffic control stations. There's a lot of different air traffic controller stations possible. Tower. These people are going to have the binoculars. They'll be looking out the window. They give clearance to land. Tower gives clearance to land. Tower gives clearance to take off. Tower could tell you how to enter the traffic pattern. They could tell you if you're number 1, number 2, number 3, what number you anticipate, how close you are to landing. Tower. So air traffic control position called tower. Air traffic control position called tower. They give you clearance to land. They give you clearance to take off. They tell you how to enter the traffic pattern. Typically, at a towered airport, you typically do not see midfield cross. So this is a very important lesson I'm trying to tell you here. Very important lesson is that at a towered airport, you typically do not get clearance to cross midfield. So like if I was at a non-towered airport, it's a very common traffic pattern entry, midfield cross. Very common entry at a non-towered airport. But at a towered airport, that is not common. So if you was in a position to do a midfield cross at a towered airport, the air traffic control tower controller would probably instead tell you to make right traffic. So at a towered airport, it is very, very uncommon for an air traffic controller to set you up for a midfield cross. Very uncommon. It is more common, it is more likely that the towered airport tower controller would have you make right traffic. So at a control towered airport, it is very common to have the pilot fly over the center line of the runway to join the downwind. Instead, the air traffic controller will probably have you do right-hand traffic pattern and avoid having to cross over the airport. Tower. Tower gives you permission to land or take off. Clear to land, clear to take off. Tower could give you instructions, land and hold short. Well, as a student pilot, you should not accept that clearance. Tower could give you clearances such as clear for touch and go. Well, as a VU student, we should not accept that clearance. Touch and goes are against our SOP, standard operating procedure. Tower could give you a clearance called clear for the option. Ooh, look at that. New clearances. Air traffic controller could tell us the phrase clear for the option. What does clear for the option mean? It means you as the pilot have your choice to do anything that you want with that piece of pavement. Could be a full stop landing, could be a touch and go, could be a low approach only, could be a go around. So clear for the option means you have your option of any of those. For us, we would probably take that as a clearance to land. Once you land, clearance to land, then your job is to exit the runway. Left or right, whatever gets you off the pavement, air traffic control, the tower controller will typically tell you if they want you to go left or right. Once you get off the active runway from tower, then you would then talk to ground, air traffic controller called ground. So that was tower. As we continue moving forward, we're going to see some new air traffic control positions, and it's got a new picture. This one is called departure. So departure, again, these folks, these air traffic controllers have radar capability. Yes, they have radar capability. So approach controller, they have the radar dish in the basement. They're usually in a dark room, and they're following the transponders on the radar screen. So our typical flight, we started at Evansville. We talked to clearance delivery first. We got clearance from ground control next to get to the active runway. We got tower to give us clearance to take off. Now we are flying. And our next frequency we're going to talk to is departure. So departure, they have radar technology. They will follow you on the radar scope as you fly your long cross-country flight following from Evansville to Eagle Creek. Departure. They are the ones who will watch your squawk code when you squawk 1, 2, 3, 4. or whatever example code they might give you. You can see in this picture, I don't know if you guys see my mouse or not. Do you see my mouse when I move it on top of the PowerPoint screen? You do? Is that a thumbs up? So right here, this is where those strips pop out. So you can see those strips that are created by clearance delivery when you file flight plans. These strips will pop out in this area, and then the air traffic controller can pick those strips up and have an idea of what airplanes might be coming up next. And you can see on this board, this is where this air traffic control station already has a few possible strips. So there are 2 strips already up on this board, and those are 2 possible aircraft in the area that this air traffic controller is either expecting or currently controlling. Departure. The folks, okay, so departure would be when you're leaving the airport environment. The next slide says the word approach. So approach is very similar. It's actually pretty much the exact same station. It really just depends on how big the airport is. If you on the radio call for Indianapolis departure, that assumes that you are leaving the Indianapolis area. Whereas if you call them on the radio and you say Indianapolis approach, it's assumed that you're approaching, coming into the Indianapolis area. With all that said, it's generally the same air traffic controller. It's generally the same workstation, and they're utilizing the same technology. So if you call them approach, if you call them departure, it's kind of a tomato situation. I typically say depart. I usually say approach, actually. I typically say approach, but you can say departure or approach. They'll respond the same. If it gets to be a very, very large airport, they might actually break up the designations like they should with approach and departure. But a lot of the smaller airports around here, it's the same air traffic controller servicing both functions, approach and departure. Okay. So here's some more information about lost communication procedures. So we covered the C's already: climb, communicate, confess, conserve, comply, cross-check VOR, check compass. We covered the C's, circle. Here, it's the same idea. We're having some sort of lost communication procedures. We're not having much luck getting a hold of air traffic control on the radio. So these are some troubleshooting steps. If you're having trouble getting a hold of air traffic control using the radio, some really simple things. Let's check the volume. So on your G1000 screen, at the top right of the screen, there's a possible volume. And then in the FMS box, between the pilots, there's some other possible options there. But, check the volume. Turn up the volume. It really is that simple. It's amazing how often sometimes we turn the volume down. It might not just be the volume of the VHF radio. It could be the volume of your headset. So sometimes if you have a fancy headset, you might need to check the volume there as well. It says check the switch position on the audio panel. So what does that mean? We have a few different communication radios inside our aircraft. So our aircraft has COM 1, our aircraft has COM 2. So it's possible that you might have switched your radio frequency to a different communications radio to listen to the weather. And you might need to switch the communication back to COM 1 for talking to air traffic control. So we call this the selector switch. You can only talk on one radio at a time. Let's say that. You can only transmit on one radio at a time. That's really important. So you can listen, you can receive multiple radio frequencies at once. It's possible that you can listen to the local weather on a communication radio and listen to the tower on a different communications radio, but you can only transmit one radio at a time. So you might need to check your switch position to make sure you're actually transmitting on the same frequency you are listening to. Another troubleshooting item on this list says verify that your microphone is properly plugged into the jack. Over the years, the old style headsets were slightly extra wider than the newer style, which are slightly more narrow. So it's possible we've had known issues before where students with older headsets have wallered out the jack, and the jack is now expanded slightly inside our Cirrus terminals. So if that's the case, you know, you might need to, you know, wiggle the plug a bit. If you have an older style headset, you're supposed to be using the adapters that we have in the Cirrus. Make the investment if you can into a newer, fancier headset. It's going to be more clear with noise canceling capabilities. But you know, just verify that your microphone jack is properly plugged in. It's very common that, you know, the microphone jack might come unplugged. Maybe you twisted your head, maybe you pulled slightly. Whatever the case, make sure you're making good connection. You need a good connection. The next troubleshooting bullet point for us is pretty common. Ensure that you're using the correct frequency. You might even try a different frequency for that same ATC facility. So remember when we studied the airport facilities directory, the green book, the chart supplement, it's very common that you can find secondary frequencies. So there are multiple frequencies around the Eagle Creek Airport. There are multiple frequencies that you could use to contact Indianapolis approach. And so there are multiple frequencies out there. And if you're struggling with getting a hold of ATC on your current frequency, you might want to try to reference another possible frequency. Maybe you'll have better luck on a different frequency. So ensure that you're using the correct frequency. Many times you hear it said over the radio. They say the words, check your last known. Check your last known, KNOWN, your last known frequency. So it's possible that you inputted an incorrect number. And so if you return to your last frequency, the frequency that you had prior, maybe that air traffic controller could repeat the correct frequency for you again. Very, very common. You might just be on the wrong frequency. The next bullet point says, try the handheld microphone. I have some students like I call it the trucker mic, breaker 1, 2. But yeah, you know, you can pick up the actual handheld trucker mic for you in the Cirrus that's located underneath your elbow, your right elbow. You can lift up that center console and there's actually a handheld trucker mic, a handheld microphone that you can plug in. And then you could use the handheld microphone because maybe something's wrong with your microphone on your headset. Maybe that secondary port might help you out for getting some good communications going on. It says try the other radio. One of our other bullet points is try the other radio. So the idea is that we have two different communications radio in this cockpit. So if you're having trouble with COM 1, you might have better luck trying COM 2. Yeah, it's that simple. And then like the bottom, we covered this already, try the last ATC facility that you were talking to. So if you was having good luck communicating with an air traffic controller beforehand, and they told you to change frequencies and you're having issues, maybe you could switch back over and talk to the old air traffic controller for a short time, and they might be able to help solve the problem for you. Typically, it's lost in translation, you know, not repeating the correct frequencies clearly. So those are some issues that you could try for lost communications procedures. These are more of troubleshooting items. Remember, your real procedures would be like the C's for lost communication, for lost procedures, or the C's. And then remember that there's a transponder squawk of 7600 if you've lost your communications. So if all of these troubleshooting items are not helping you out enough, you might possibly need to squawk 7600 to let ATC know that you're having issues. So this is us covering ATC communication issues. I'm not seeing anybody post any here. Anybody's chatting it up about, looks like Slack. I've got some messages here. And on Slack, okay, he's got back in. That's good. Okay, so I am moving forward. We are going to keep moving forward. The next slide that's in our PowerPoint presentation. So let's see. You guys don't see my slides right now, I don't think. So I hit this button. Okay, so I think you guys see the slides now. And if I move forward, we're seeing a very, very, very important information here. So this information is the light gun signals. So this will be on the test. This will be, you know, on the ABC written multiple choice final. It's very, very important information. As a pilot, you're supposed to have these committed to memory. A lot of pilots purchase knee boards, and they have knee boards in their cockpit, and that also have these same procedures written out. So what we're learning is that we have a few different possible light gun signals. So the idea is that typically you come into the airport environment, you have a working radio, you're able to get clearance using the radio. They can give you clearance to land, clearance to take off. Normally you can use the radio to get your clearances from air traffic control. Okay, say it's a bad day and your radio fails. If your radio fails and you find yourself approaching a control zone, you find yourself approaching a controlled airport and your radio has failed and you cannot get a hold of anybody on the radio, what are your options? Personally, I would not continue traveling to that airport. I mean, you know, we don't have to go to a control towered airport. If you are having, as a student pilot, if you're out on a solo mission and you're struggling with the radio and you cannot get a hold of Terre Haute Tower, you can't get a hold of Terre Haute Approach, you can't get a hold of this control towered airport, my best advice would be to stop continuing, don't fly to that airport. You can turn around and come home and we can work on the issues with the airplane. We can send out an instructor with you to try to see if we're pushing the right buttons. But if you had to, if it was a position where you were already in their airspace, again, you know, it'd be really tempting to squawk 7600 and just leave their airspace. But if you need to land at a control towered airport, if you need to engage in this emergency situation of emergency lost communications, it is possible for the control tower to shoot light gun signals towards your aircraft. And depending on what color light gun signal they shoot at you, whether it's green, red, or white, whether it's steady or flashing, is the different types of clearances that they could be giving you. So if everybody's seeing it, over here on the slides, we have a steady green light gun signals. A steady green light. There are 3 different situations that could exist for us as pilots. We could have a situation where we're on the ground. We could have a situation where we're in the air. So I guess that'll be 2. They have a 3rd category for movement of vehicles, equipment, or personnel. So we're going to focus more on aircraft on the ground or aircraft in the air. So if you're on the ground and you see a steady green light from the air traffic control tower, they are giving you clearance to take off. So steady green, green means go. You're on the ground, holding short of the active runway. They shine a steady green light at you. You are clear to take off. Great. Awesome. It says aircraft in flight. The next category would be aircraft in flight. If you're in flight, you're in the traffic pattern, you're near the runway, and you look at the control tower and you see a steady green light, they are giving you clearance to land. You have clearance to land. So steady green, green means go. Clear to land, clear to take off. Awesome. We love it when it's that simple. Okay. The next possible light gun signal is a flashing green. So it's not steady, it's a flashing green. Flashing green on the ground. Flashing green on the ground, you are cleared for taxi. So if you need to taxi your airplane to get to the active runway, you look up and you see that there's a flashing green light, you are clear to taxi and you can start moving your aircraft beyond that movement, non-movement boundary. You can cross the single dash and start making your way to the active runway. That is the flashing green light. That's aircraft on the ground. The next says aircraft in flight. So you're flying the airplane, you're in the traffic pattern, you're near the airport, you look over at the control tower and you see a flashing green light. Well, that says return for landing, parentheses, to be followed by a steady green at the proper time. So they acknowledge that you're flying your airplane near the traffic pattern, in the traffic pattern, near the runway. They acknowledge that they see you. They have not given you clearance yet. It is not a solid green, but it's a flashing green because they want you to know that your time is coming. You're almost ready for the solid green, but not yet. So if you see flashing green, then you need to continue flying the traffic pattern. You need to continue circling the airport. You need to continue putting yourself in position, because when the time comes, you expect to get the solid green, but not yet. So if I was like on base to final and I look at the control tower and I see a flashing green, I would stop descending, I'd power up, and I'd go back to traffic pattern altitude, and I'd circle another lap around the traffic pattern, because I'm hoping to see the solid green next time around. So aircraft in flight, aircraft on the ground, flashing green. Flashing green on the ground, you are clear for taxi. Awesome. Aircraft in flight, flashing green, you are supposed to return for landing, which means continue circling the airport traffic pattern. You're not clear for landing yet, but we expect you're going to get the clear for landing solid green soon. Green is good. We like the green messages. The next message is a solid red. Ooh, solid red. So solid red, if you're on the ground and you look up to the air traffic control tower and you see a solid red light flashing at you and it's solid red, that means stop. S-T-O-P. Do not continue moving forward. Stop. It is that simple. So light gun signals, red, stop. And that's if you're on the ground at the control tower at airport. If you're in the air, it says aircraft in flight, solid red, give way to other aircraft and continue circling. So solid red, it means you are not clear to land. You need to give way. There's somebody else that has more clearance than you, and you need to continue circling the airport, continue flying the traffic pattern, but there's no reason for you to descend and get lower and closer to that runway, because you have the solid red, give way. Somebody else has clearance to land or take off. You need to give way and let that protected airport runway, let somebody else have the clearance. So solid red in the air, you are to give way to other aircraft, continue circling the environment, and hopefully you'll start to see some green later on. Okay, so those were steady reds. We're over the halfway point on this slide. We're now into flashing red. So let's talk about the aircraft on the ground. The aircraft on the ground, if you're on the ground and you're driving around taxiing and you look up and you see flashing red lights coming at you from the tower, it says taxi clear of the runway in use. So you have gotten yourself into a position where you're not supposed to be. Maybe you're on a runway. You need to get off that runway. You need to get out the way because somebody else is needing that piece of pavement. So if you see a flashing red, do not stop where you're at. You need to keep moving and get off the runway. If you saw solid red, just stop. If you see flashing red, it means taxi off of this piece of pavement that you're on, get over to the next taxiway, get over to the next non-movement area, because whatever piece of pavement you're on, typically the runway, is needing to be used by somebody else. So flashing red, taxi clear of the runway in use. Okay, here's an interesting one. Aircraft in flight, flashing red, aircraft in flight. It says the airport is unsafe. Do not land. Airport is unsafe. Do not land. That is flashing red. So if you was out there flying your airplane trying to land at a control tower at airport and you're seeing a flashing red light and you're flying around circling around the airport traffic pattern, there's no reason for you to continue circling around that airport traffic pattern. The airport is unsafe. Do not land. I personally would exit the traffic pattern and go find another airport, probably a uncontrolled airport where radio traffic calls don't have to happen anyway. So these are the ATC light gun signals for the control tower at airports. Flashing red light. If you're in the air, the airport's unsafe. Do not land. I personally would probably go find a new airport. If you was on the ground, flashing red is taxi clear of the runway. Get off the active runway. We've now made our way to flashing white. So we're getting to the bottom of this slide and we have flashing white. If your aircraft is on the ground, you're taxiing around on the ground, you look up at the air traffic control tower and you see a flashing white light. Flashing white light means return to your starting point on the runway. Return to your starting point on the runway. So you've started taxiing out, you've got your way into the taxiway structure, you look up, you see flashing white, get back to where you began. get back to the hangar, get back to the FBO, get back to your starting point on the airport. They do not want you to go further into this environment. If you're in the air, it's a not applicable. So it's a trick question. You will see questions where it asks, what does flashing white mean in the air? That is a trick question on the exam because it says not applicable. So if you're flying around in the air and you see a flashing white light from the control tower, it's they're actually trying to point that white light at somebody else, or you're seeing the reflection of the sun, or something else is weird and different, because a flashing white light is not applicable to in the air light gun signals. This takes us to our last possible slide, bottom here, and that is the red and green, alternating red and green. So it'd be like red flash, green flash, red flash, green flash. And that means exercise extreme caution. Whether you're in the air or whether you're on the ground, exercise extreme caution. So I used to, I had an examiner. I've created a lot of pilots, and I'd set up a lot of students to take the real FAA check ride. And so I used to have an examiner that would ask my students these certain questions. And he says, okay, examiner is asking, he's quizzing, he's setting up a test question for the student on the oral exam. And examiner wants to know, what are you going to do? He says that you come down final and you see steady green light. You're coming down final, steady green light, so you're clear to land. Okay, you glance down, you check your airspeed, you check your flaps, you look up, and now you see flashing red and green. Flashing red and green. What do you do? And the students would always have the most difficult time trying to figure out the answer. Half the students say, well, I would go around. I would not land. And then the other half of the students say, well, I'd go ahead and land. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's just tricky because if you want to go around, it makes sense. You know, red and green, exercise extreme caution. You know, maybe you should go around. But then other students, they say, oh, well, I had steady green light. It means I'm clear to land. And they would go ahead and land, but they exercise extreme caution while they land. So there's really not a right or wrong answer. It's just a tricky question that I've heard examiners ask pilots on the day of the check ride. So I thought it'd be good to expose you to that one as well. Some of the big things to remember is a solid green light means you're clear to land, clear to take off. Flashing red and green means that you need to exercise extreme caution. And I think we covered those pretty thoroughly. So if there's any questions about these light gun signals, now is a pretty good time. These are all possible signals that you would see if you were trying to operate inside a control zone without a radio, or if you're having radio issues. So if you was squawking 7600 still pointed for the airport, they'd probably start using the light gun signals on you. Personally, if I'm having radio issues, I'm probably going to leave that airport and head to an uncontrolled airport where radio is not required anyways. So that's a light gun signals. Clicking around, seeing if anybody else has any other. There's only one other question on that, one other slide there, and that other slide here just says the word questions. So this has been us covering the material from chapter 5. It's an open floor for any types of questions that you guys might have. Is there any feedback anywhere? I don't think I'm really getting any feedback from anybody. Okay, well, so congratulations. We made it to the end of chapter 5. You guys have lots more practice questions that are now on the blackboard. You can find a practice chapter 5 test in the chapter 5 folder. You can find some practice midterm tests in the midterm folder. When we get together on Wednesday, we'll have a review session. After that review session, the chapter 5 midterm will be launched. You'll have 2.5 hours to take that test whenever you hit start. So whenever you hit start, you'll have 2.5 hours to take the test, and you will have to have completed it before our get together, before Monday. So let's say Sunday night. So before Sunday night, you'll be required to finish that chapter 5 midterm test, and then on Monday we'll be going over that test.
So it's not due Wednesday, it's due up until Sunday. So you have like every day to do it until Sunday.
Yes, but once you start it, you have to finish it. So
Right, yeah, it's not like a save and continue. It's a one chance and you're done.
Yep. So we'll have a review session on Wednesday. When we finish our review session, I'll make it active. And whenever you click it, it starts and you get a 2.5 hour window. I would not wait for Sunday. I would not wait for Sunday because heaven forbid if you have some issue or some crashes and we got to email and text and get back and forth to try to relaunch it for you. You know, I don't wait for the last minute. You'll have 2.5 hours when it launches. It's chapters 1 through 5. We have a lot of practice questions that are currently up, so you can practice. And we'll have a review session for you to bring in any questions for Wednesday, or if you have any questions now, I don't mind addressing those. Well, that was a good question, Kai. Thanks for bringing that one up. So I'm not trying to hold anybody up. If anybody's trying to log off and head out, I understand. If anybody wants to hang around and answer any questions, feel free. I appreciate you guys, sticking in there. All right. Well, thank you guys so much and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.